He was not always rich, not always powerful, and certainly not always feared. In fact, people who knew him as a young boy remembered a skinny kid from a small town who used to deliver newspapers in the mornings before school. His father was a clerk in a local government office, and his mother stayed home, making sure the family had food on the table even when money was short. Life was not easy, but the boy grew up watching his parents work hard, save every penny, and never complain. Those lessons stayed with him. From a young age, he had big dreams. While his friends played cricket or football on dusty streets, he sat on a broken wooden bench outside his house and read books about business, wealth, and famous leaders. He was fascinated by stories of men who had built empires from nothing. He wanted to be like them, not just to earn money, but to prove that someone from his background could rise to the very top. His neighbors used to laugh and call him the dreamer, but the boy did not care. Inside, he carried a fire that no one could put out. In school, he was not the best student in every subject, but he was curious. He asked questions others did not. When teachers explained something, he wanted to know why it worked that way and how it could be done better. He loved mathematics because numbers made sense to him, and he enjoyed economics because it explained how money flowed in the world. More than once, teachers warned him that his ideas were too bold, that he should focus on getting safe government jobs like other children. But he refused. He wanted more. When he finally went to university, he entered a new world. He saw students driving fancy cars, wearing expensive clothes, and carrying the latest gadgets. At first, he felt small and out of place. But instead of being discouraged, he studied them. He wanted to learn their mindset, their confidence, and their way of thinking. He worked extra hours in the library, reading business case studies and biographies of successful entrepreneurs. While others partied, he stayed awake at night drawing plans in an old notebook. That notebook, filled with sketches, numbers, and ideas, would one day become the seed of his empire. After graduation, he did not take the safe route. Many of his classmates accepted secure jobs in banks and companies, but he wanted freedom. With only a few $100s borrowed from a relative, he started a small business selling electronic accessories. It was not glamorous, just chargers, earphones, and cables, but he treated it like a giant company. He worked 14 hours a day, handled customers personally, and kept records of every single sale. Slowly, he built trust. Customers returned not only for the products but because they liked the young man who always greeted them with energy and respect. The business grew. From a single shop, he expanded to 2, then 4. Each time, people warned him not to take risks, but he trusted his instincts. He reinvested every rupee of profit back into the business. He lived in a small rented apartment, wore the same old shirts, and ate simple meals, but he dreamed of a future where he would control skyscrapers. To him, sacrifice today meant freedom tomorrow. His friends could not understand why he refused holidays or nights out, but he knew exactly what he was building. Within 5 years, his small venture turned into a regional brand. Larger companies started noticing him. Instead of feeling scared, he felt excited. He was not intimidated by big names. He believed that giants could be beaten with speed, innovation, and persistence. He hired young people like himself, trained them personally, and created a culture of hard work. His employees admired him because he was not only a boss but also a mentor. He taught them that failure was not shameful, but quitting was. Soon, investors came knocking. They offered him funding to expand further. Many people from his background would have hesitated, fearing the risk of losing everything. But he accepted boldly. With that capital, he opened branches in major cities. His brand started appearing on billboards. Television channels invited him for interviews, and newspapers called him the rising star of business. His parents, once worried about his uncertain path, now walked with pride in their neighborhood. The boy who once delivered newspapers was becoming a household name. But success did not come without challenges. Competitors tried to crush him, suppliers sometimes betrayed him, and banks refused loans in the early years. There were nights when he sat alone in his office, staring at unpaid bills and wondering if he had made a mistake. Yet every time doubt entered his mind, He remembered his childhood. His father's tired face after long office hours, his mother stitching old clothes to make them last another year. He promised himself he would never go back to that life. That promise kept him moving forward. Over the next decade, he diversified. He entered technology, real estate, and even energy. Every move was calculated, and though some ventures failed, the overall growth was unstoppable. His company became one of the most powerful in the country. International partners began to take interest, and foreign investors visited his glass-walled headquarters to shake hands with the man who had once been called the dreamer. His net worth climbed into billions, and magazines placed his photo on glossy covers. He had become a symbol of ambition, discipline, and fearless leadership. Yet, beneath all the glory, there was a change in his heart. The boy who once valued humility began to believe he was untouchable. Power gave him confidence, but also pride. He expected perfection from everyone and had little patience for mistakes. People admired him, but some also feared him. He did not notice it at first, but slowly the respect he commanded turned into quiet obedience mixed with hidden resentment. Still, he pressed on, blinded by the shine of wealth and power. And so the boy from a small town, who had once dreamed of reaching the top, finally stood there. He had everything: money, influence, fame. He was preparing to close the largest deal of his life, one worth $7.5 billion, a deal that would secure his place among the greatest businessmen of his generation. The world looked at him with awe, but destiny was preparing a lesson that all the money in the world could not prevent. The billionaire CEO had already achieved so much, but now he stood at the edge of the greatest moment of his life. For years, he had built his empire step by step, climbing from a small shop owner to the leader of a multinational company. But this new deal, worth $7.5 billion, was different. It was not just another business agreement. It was a turning point, one that would shape the future of his company, his reputation, and his legacy. If he closed this deal, he would not only be rich, he would become unstoppable, a man remembered in history as one of the greatest business minds of the century. Everyone around him knew how high the stakes were. His board members whispered about it during late-night meetings. His managers worked extra hours, polishing every detail of the proposal. Financial advisors ran numbers again and again, checking and rechecking, because a single mistake could shake the confidence of investors. It was not just his dream anymore. It was the dream of hundreds of employees, shareholders, and partners who had tied their futures to him. If he succeeded, they all would rise with him. If he failed, the fall would be just as great. The deal involved international investors, men and women who controlled billions of dollars and looked at business as both science and art. They had many choices of where to invest, and they had seen empires rise and collapse in the blink of an eye. They were careful, suspicious, and always alert. For them, character mattered just as much as numbers. They wanted to trust the man behind the company, not just the company itself. And so, every move of the CEO was watched closely. His words, his actions, even his expressions. Nothing went unnoticed. The media too smelled the importance of the moment. Newspapers published headlines like "The Billion-Dollar Gamble" and "Can he seal the world's largest deal?" Business channels broadcast interviews with experts, debating whether he could pull it off. Some called him a genius, a man who could turn dust into gold. Others warned that his arrogance might cost him. Every article, every comment added more pressure, and the CEO felt it. He woke up each morning knowing that the entire world was waiting to see whether he would rise higher or crash down. Inside the company headquarters, the atmosphere was tense but electric. Employees moved quickly through shiny hallways, clutching files, preparing presentations, and updating reports. The CEO's personal assistant barely slept, scheduling back-to-back meetings, calls, and rehearsals. Everyone knew the weight of what was coming. This was not a small victory to celebrate quietly. This was the kind of event that would make or break careers. A signature on the right paper could change lives forever. The CEO himself was restless. He had always been confident, even fearless, but this time he could feel the pressure pressing on his shoulders. At night, he sat in his study, staring at city lights through tall glass windows. His mind replayed every scenario. What if the investors pulled out at the last minute? What if the competitors spread rumors? What if the stock market reacted badly? These thoughts kept him awake, and he found himself walking back and forth like a tiger in a cage. Yet at the same time, there was a thrill in his chest. He loved the risk, the challenge, the idea that billions depended on him alone. It made him feel alive. But high stakes also meant high expectations. The investors wanted not only profit but also proof that he was the right man to lead such a massive venture. They studied his past, his public image, even his personal life. Every action he took, whether in the boardroom, at a party, or even in his own home, could leave an impression. A careless word, a small display of pride, or a sign of disrespect could shake their trust. They believed that a man's behavior in private reflected his behavior in business. The CEO, however, was so focused on numbers and strategies that he forgot how fragile trust could be. His advisors reminded him again and again to remain calm, polite, and composed at all times. They are not just buying into the company, one advisor told him. They are buying into you. They want to see that you are wise, patient, and respectful. The CEO nodded, but inside he thought, they need me more than I need them. That belief made him careless. He believed that his success had already proven who he was. He thought no one would dare question him. What he did not realize was that investors were not blinded by wealth. They wanted integrity as well as intelligence. As the final days approached, the tension grew even stronger. The office buzzed with excitement. People whispered numbers like 7.5 billion as if it were magic. Partners from around the world flew in, staying in luxury hotels, waiting for the final signatures. Security at the headquarters tightened, and journalists camped outside the gates, hoping to capture a photo of the CEO stepping out of his car. Every hour felt heavier than the last, and the city itself seemed to hold its breath. At home, however, the CEO carried the same pressure. He brought his stress into the mansion, pacing through marble hallways and snapping at small inconveniences. His staff felt his mood shift, his words grew sharper, his patience shorter. Even his family noticed the change. He was not the warm man he had once been. He was hard, focused, and sometimes cruel in his tone. Yet he excused it by telling himself that greatness demanded sacrifices, and people around him should understand. He told himself again and again that once the deal was signed, everything would be worth it. The late nights, the endless stress, the moments of anger. It would all be forgotten when he stood on top of the world. He imagined the headlines, CEO secures historic $7.5 billion deal. He pictured investors raising glasses of champagne in his honor. He saw himself on magazine covers, smiling, powerful, victorious. This image kept him moving, kept him fighting, even when exhaustion threatened to pull him down. But the higher the stakes, the sharper the fall. What the CEO did not realize was that destiny often hides in small moments, in the quiet spaces between grand plans. A careless outburst, a single insult, could weigh as much as billions of dollars. He was so focused on the mountain ahead that he did not see the stone lying in his path. And when the moment came, the world would watch as everything he built trembled on the edge of collapse. The CEO's mansion was a world of its own. It stood high on a hill, with tall iron gates, marble floors, and chandeliers that sparkled like diamonds. Every corner of the house showed wealth. Paintings on the walls, golden-framed mirrors, and furniture so expensive that ordinary people could not even dream of owning it. For outsiders, it looked like a palace. For the CEO, it was simply home, a place where he spent less and less time with family and more time thinking about business deals. Behind the beauty of the house, there were people who kept everything running, maids, drivers, cooks, and guards. They worked quietly, moving around like shadows, making sure the place was spotless, meals were ready, and the CEO's every need was fulfilled. Among them was a maid who had worked in the mansion for years. She was loyal, hardworking, and respectful. She never complained, even when her hours stretched late into the night. For her, this job meant survival. It was the only way she could send her daughter to school and keep food on the table. Her daughter, a shy little girl of around 10 years old, often came to the mansion when her mother had no one to look after her. She did not disturb anyone. She carried her school books and sat quietly in the corner of the kitchen or the hallway, doing her homework. Sometimes she looked around at the grand house with wide eyes, amazed by the size of the rooms and the beauty of the things inside. She had never seen so much wealth before. To her, it was like stepping into another world, a world that belonged to people far different from her mother and herself. On one particular day, the CEO was preparing for a very important meeting. The investors he had been trying to impress were already in town, and he had scheduled a private video call to finalize key points. He was tense, restless, and easily annoyed. He walked up and down the large living room, his phone in one hand, papers in the other, while staff hurried to make sure everything was perfect. The cook adjusted the snacks on the tray. The driver double-checked the car outside. The maid polished the table glass again and again, even though it already shone. Everyone could feel the storm in the air, the kind of pressure that came when their boss was under stress. The little girl, as usual, sat near the hallway with her notebook. She was trying to solve a math problem, her lips moving quietly as she counted on her fingers. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the CEO enter the room. His sharp eyes immediately caught sight of her. In that moment, his stress boiled over. The image of a child sitting in the corner, with books scattered around, irritated him. To him, the house had to look perfect, no mistakes, no distractions, not even a child in the wrong place. He stopped, his voice rising like thunder. "What are you doing here?" he snapped. The girl looked up, startled, her pencil slipping from her fingers. Before she could answer, his words grew harsher. "You stupid kid. Don't you understand this is not a place for you? Get out of here." His voice echoed across the marble walls. The little girl's eyes filled with tears. She quickly gathered her books, clutching them tightly to her chest. Her small hands trembled as she tried to hide her face. She had not meant to do anything wrong. She had only wanted to wait for her mother while finishing her homework. But the sharp words cut into her heart like a knife. She stood up, her cheeks wet, and ran toward the kitchen, trying to stay out of sight. The maid froze. She had heard everything. Her heart broke seeing her daughter humiliated in front of everyone. But she did not dare speak. Her job depended on her silence, and she knew one wrong word could cost her everything. With her head bowed, she quietly guided her daughter away, whispering to her to be strong, even though she herself was holding back tears. The staff in the mansion exchanged nervous glances. They were used to their boss's temper, but this outburst was different. It was directed at an innocent child who had done nothing wrong. Still, no one dared say anything. They lowered their eyes, pretending to continue their work, while inside they felt the weight of what had just happened. What the CEO did not realize was that someone else had witnessed the entire scene. One of the investors who had come for a private discussion had been standing in the adjoining room. He had quietly observed how the CEO treated the maid's daughter. To him, this was not just an angry moment. It was a revelation. He saw not only the sharp words but the arrogance, the lack of kindness, the absence of respect for someone powerless. For a man about to lead a $7.5 billion deal, such behavior spoke louder than any presentation or profit chart. The CEO, however, moved on as if nothing had happened. He adjusted his tie, looked at his watch, and called for the meeting to begin. In his mind, it was just another burst of anger, something small and unimportant compared to the giant business matters waiting for him. He did not notice the sadness in the maid's eyes, the shame in her daughter's tears, or the cold silence of the investor who had seen everything. The mansion returned to its usual rhythm, staff working, the child hidden away, and the CEO focused again on numbers and deals. But beneath the surface, something had already shifted. What seemed like a small outburst to him was, in truth, a turning point. It was the kind of moment that revealed the truth about a man's character, the kind of moment that could decide the fate of billion-dollar deals and change the course of lives forever. The girl wiped her tears quietly, not fully understanding why she had been shouted at. Her mother held her close, whispering comfort, but deep inside she felt helpless. The investor walked away silently, making his own conclusions. And the CEO, unaware of the storm he had just created with a few careless words, prepared to face the most important negotiation of his life. The day of the important call had finally arrived. The CEO woke up early, but sleep had already been broken for many nights. He had tossed and turned, thinking of strategies, thinking of numbers, imagining headlines in newspapers. The pressure was crushing him. He told himself that it was all worth it, that once the $7.5 billion deal was signed, he would be remembered as one of the greatest businessmen alive. But until that moment, his nerves were stretched thin like a rope about to snap. He sat at the breakfast table, but he barely touched his food. The golden toast and the fresh juice lay untouched, while he tapped his fingers impatiently on the glass table. His mind was already at work, rehearsing what he would say. He wanted his words to sound powerful, his tone to inspire confidence. But he also worried. What if the investors asked something unexpected? What if he made a mistake? The thought made his chest tighten. He hated weakness, even in himself. Back at the mansion, everyone knew that today was not an ordinary day. The staff moved around as quietly as possible, afraid that any small sound might anger their boss. The cook prepared the tea exactly the way he liked it. The gardener trimmed the flowers at the gate, though no one would notice them on such a day. The maid polished the silver handles on the doors until they shone. Every person in that house understood the pressure their employer carried, and in their own way, they tried to ease it. But no one could calm the storm brewing inside him. The CEO's assistant entered the room with a laptop, a stack of papers, and a phone pressed to his ear. He was confirming details with the investors' team, making sure the timing was perfect and the connection flawless. He spoke quickly, nervously, his eyes darting to the CEO every few seconds. The CEO gave a sharp nod, but said little. His silence was heavy, like a cloud ready to burst. The little girl, the maid's daughter, had come again that day. She had no idea how much tension filled the house. She sat in the hallway with her books, writing down notes from her school. Her small voice whispered as she read a passage aloud. To her, it was just another day with homework and waiting for her mother to finish work. She had no idea that a storm was about to hit her life as well. The CEO paced the living room, speaking to himself, rehearsing sentences under his breath. His voice grew louder as he argued with his own imagination. He wanted to appear calm, but inside he was boiling. Sweat formed on his forehead even though the air conditioner was running. He pulled at his tie, loosened it, and then tightened it again. His hands shook slightly, a detail he would never admit to anyone. Pressure, after all, was supposed to make him stronger. At that exact moment, his eyes landed on the small figure sitting with her notebook. The sight of her, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a pencil between her teeth, irritated him. It was as if her presence mocked his seriousness. Didn't she understand that this was no place for her? Didn't she see that this was a battlefield, not a playground? The CEO's thoughts turned sharp, and his patience shattered like glass. He stormed toward her. His polished shoes clacked against the marble floor, the sound echoing through the house. "What are you doing here?" he shouted, his voice like a whip. The little girl looked up, startled. Her wide eyes blinked, and she tried to open her mouth, but no words came out. She was too scared. The CEO's anger grew. "Are you deaf? Didn't I tell you not to sit here? You stupid kid. Can't you see this is not your place? Get out. Now!" His voice shook the room. It was so loud that the maid dropped the silver tray she was carrying in the kitchen. The plates clattered, breaking into pieces, but no one dared move to pick them up. The whole mansion froze. The little girl's lips trembled. Tears filled her eyes, and her hands fumbled with the notebook. She hugged it to her chest as if it could protect her. She looked down, ashamed, and ran to the kitchen, her small feet barely making a sound on the polished floor. Her sobs echoed faintly as she disappeared behind the doorway. The maid's heart shattered. She wanted to protect her daughter, to tell the CEO he had no right to insult a child. But she could not. Her job, her survival, her family's future, all depended on staying silent. She bent down, pretending to gather the broken plates, while tears blurred her vision. Her daughter clung to her, still shaking, and she whispered soft words of comfort that even she did not believe. The CEO straightened his tie, as if nothing had happened. To him, the matter was small, not worth remembering. He told himself that discipline was necessary, that his house had to remain perfect, that no one, not even a child, could disturb his focus. He picked up his laptop and signaled to his assistant to prepare for the call. His mind had already moved on, back to billions of dollars, back to deals and dreams of glory. But the house had changed. The staff moved more quietly than before, their faces pale. They avoided his eyes, carrying with them the memory of his harsh words. The little girl's sobs echoed in their minds, a reminder that sometimes power can crush innocence. And standing silently in the adjoining room was the investor, who had seen everything. He had been waiting for the meeting, but instead he had witnessed the raw anger of the man he was about to trust with billions. He said nothing, but in his silence, decisions were already forming. The CEO believed he had silenced a distraction, but he had planted the seed of his downfall. The tension he carried, the pressure he unleashed, had revealed a side of him that could not be hidden by wealth or power. To him, it was just another outburst in a stressful day. To others, it was the truth about his character. And the truth was about to cost him more than he could imagine. The CEO thought the matter was finished. He believed his outburst was just a moment of stress, a small scene that meant nothing compared to the weight of billions waiting for his attention. In his mind, shouting at a child was not important, not when he was about to close one of the biggest deals in history. He fixed his tie, opened his laptop, and prepared to join the video call. But he did not know that someone else had been standing nearby, watching and listening to every word he had just spoken. The investor had arrived quietly that afternoon, stepping into the mansion with little noise. He was not the kind of man who demanded attention when he entered a room. Unlike the CEO, who loved grand entrances and flashing cameras, this investor believed that true power spoke softly. He had built his empire differently, not only with sharp business sense but also with an eye for people's hearts. He invested in leaders he could trust, men and women whose character matched their ambition. To him, a person's behavior in small moments revealed more truth than 1,000 promises in meetings. From the adjoining room, he had seen it all. He had watched the little girl sitting on the floor, innocent and harmless, her head bent over her notebook. He had seen the CEO march toward her, anger boiling on his face, and he had heard the words that cut like a knife, "You stupid kid." He had seen the girl's tears, the way she hugged her books like a shield, the way she ran away to hide in her mother's arms. And he had noticed the maid, her face pale with shame, her hands trembling as she picked up broken plates. The investor did not move, did not speak. He simply stood still, his eyes following the scene, his mind recording every detail. To him, it was more than an angry outburst. It was a window into the CEO's soul. He asked himself a question silently. If this man cannot show respect to a child in his own house, how will he treat partners, employees, or the billions entrusted to him? The CEO, unaware of these thoughts, carried on. He opened charts, highlighted figures, and rehearsed his presentation for the call. He spoke with confidence, his voice calm now, as if nothing had happened minutes ago. His assistant sat beside him, nodding nervously, still shaken by the outburst but pretending all was well. The staff continued their work, moving silently like shadows, avoiding his eyes. But the investor had already made up his mind to watch more carefully. He had seen men like this before, brilliant, ambitious, unstoppable on the outside, but careless with people, careless with respect. Such men could rise fast, but they could also destroy everything with a single mistake. He knew that billions could not be placed in the hands of someone who lacked discipline of the heart. Numbers could be adjusted, markets could rise and fall, but character could not be hidden forever. Later that evening, when the meeting began, the CEO spoke passionately. He presented growth charts, future plans, and bold promises. His words were polished, his smile confident, and his energy filled the room. The investors on the other end of the call listened carefully, impressed by the scale of his vision. Some nodded, some whispered to each other, already thinking of profits. But one man, the very man who had witnessed the earlier scene, remained silent. He listened to every word, but his mind kept going back to the image of the crying girl. He heard the CEO speak about respecting employees, but all he could remember was the harsh shout, "You stupid kid." He heard the CEO speak about building trust, but he remembered the maid's lowered eyes, filled with fear. The numbers in the presentation looked impressive, but the investor no longer trusted the man presenting them. After the meeting ended, the CEO leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He believed he had impressed everyone. He turned to his assistant with a small smile, saying, "We've got them. They'll sign tomorrow." His voice carried pride, the kind of pride that made him blind to what others truly thought. The investor, however, excused himself quietly. He left the mansion without a word, his face calm but his decision already forming. He would not risk billions with a man who could not control his temper. He would not tie his reputation to someone who believed shouting at a child was acceptable. To him, money was important, but dignity was more important. And he had just seen the truth about this CEO. Back in the kitchen, the maid tried to soothe her daughter. The little girl still clutched her books tightly, her cheeks red from crying. The mother whispered gently, telling her it was not her fault, that she had done nothing wrong. But deep inside, the maid's heart ached. She had served the house for years, worked tirelessly, sacrificed so much, only to see her child insulted in front of strangers. She wanted to scream, to defend her daughter, but fear kept her silent. In another part of the mansion, the CEO stood before a mirror, admiring his reflection. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his hair, and smiled at himself. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "the world will know my name." He had no idea that tomorrow would bring something very different, something that would crush his pride and shake his empire. The investor, riding away in his car, stared out the window at the passing city lights. He thought about the deal, the profits, the risks. But most of all, he thought about the little girl's tears. He thought about how small actions revealed big truths. He thought about the weight of trust and how easily it could be broken. By the time the car reached his hotel, his decision was clear. The deal would not move forward. The CEO believed the stage was set for his greatest triumph. But in reality, the curtains were already closing. His outburst, which he considered nothing more than a passing moment, had destroyed the very foundation of trust on which billion-dollar deals are built. And he had no idea that the man who held the pen to sign the contract had already chosen to put it down. The meeting had ended, the charts had been shown, and the promises had been made. Everyone in the room felt the weight of what had just taken place. The CEO believed he had spoken with power, that his words had carried enough strength to convince anyone to trust him. He looked proud, confident, and unshaken. He was certain the investors were impressed. But while he celebrated in his own mind, one man sat silently, his face calm, but his heart heavy with judgment. The investor who had seen the outburst earlier did not say a word. He smiled politely when required, nodded once or twice, but inside, his thoughts were fixed on something else. He could not forget the image of the little girl's tear-stained face. He could not forget the sound of the CEO's voice, sharp and cruel, shouting at a child who had done nothing wrong. That memory hung in his mind like a shadow, stronger than all the graphs and numbers he had just been shown. He had met many businessmen in his life. Some were greedy, some were ruthless, and some were clever beyond imagination. But the ones who lasted, the ones who truly built empires, had something more than money. They had discipline of the heart. They treated people with respect, whether it was a king or a servant. This, he believed, was the real foundation of success. And when he looked at the CEO now, adjusting his tie and speaking with pride, he saw a man who had forgotten this truth. The room slowly emptied. The CEO's assistant hurried off to prepare for the next day. The staff quietly cleaned the glasses left on the table, and the investor remained seated for a moment longer. He watched the CEO as one might watch a performer on a stage, brilliant in the spotlight but careless behind the curtains. In that silence, the investor's decision grew stronger. He would not invest in this man. He would not risk billions on someone who could not control his temper, who could not show basic kindness. The CEO, however, was blind to this. He walked over to the investor, full of pride, and said, "You will see tomorrow. This deal will change everything." He expected excitement in return, maybe even admiration. But the investor only gave a small smile, his lips tight, his eyes unreadable. He said, "We will see." And with that, he stood, shook the CEO's hand politely, and walked out of the mansion without another word. The silence of that moment was louder than any argument. The staff noticed it. The maid noticed it. Even the little girl, hiding in the kitchen with her schoolbooks pressed to her chest, sensed that something had shifted. The CEO, however, thought nothing of it. He believed the investor's silence meant agreement. He believed his power and money had already convinced everyone. But the investor's silence was not agreement. It was judgment. It was the kind of judgment that formed quietly, without anger, without shouting, but with complete certainty. The investor did not need to insult the CEO or lecture him. He simply chose to walk away with his decision sealed. That night, as the CEO sat in his study, sipping expensive wine and dreaming of headlines that would call him a legend, the investor sat in his hotel room, thinking deeply. He thought about the numbers. Yes, but numbers were not everything. He thought about trust, dignity, and the kind of leader he wanted to support. He had seen the CEO's true nature in a single outburst. No graph or promise could erase it. He decided then and there that the deal would not go forward. Meanwhile, the maid sat with her daughter, gently stroking her hair. The girl had stopped crying, but her face was still swollen from the tears. The mother whispered, "Don't worry, my child. You did nothing wrong. Some people are just unkind." Her voice shook, but she tried to sound strong. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew something inside the house had changed. The next morning, the CEO woke up with renewed confidence. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, straightened his suit, and told himself, "Today will be the biggest day of my life." He walked through the mansion with quick steps, barely glancing at the staff who bowed their heads as he passed. He believed the world was in his hands. But far away, in the investor's office, papers were already being signed, not to approve the deal, but to withdraw from it. The investor had made his choice quietly. He would not embarrass the CEO in public, but he would not trust him either. He would let the numbers speak later, when the deal collapsed. The CEO had always believed power was about loudness, about showing strength and dominance. But now, the true power was in silence. The investor's quiet withdrawal carried more weight than any shouted argument. And the CEO, blinded by his own pride, still could not see it. As the day moved forward, messages began to spread. Whispers started to circulate. Some people sensed hesitation among the investors. The staff noticed the unusual calm in the house. Even the maid, though far removed from business matters, felt the air was heavy with something unspoken. Everyone saw signs, except the CEO himself. He had failed to realize that respect was not optional. It was the foundation of trust, and trust was the foundation of deals. Without it, billions could vanish overnight. In that silent judgment, his empire had already begun to crack, though he would not see it until it was too late. The investor closed his folder and leaned back in his chair. He did not feel regret. He felt relief. He had made the right decision. Sometimes, the loudest truth is spoken in silence. And in the mansion that glittered with wealth, the CEO had no idea that his downfall had already been written, not by enemies, not by competitors, but by his own careless words. The next morning began with sunshine pouring through the tall windows of the CEO's mansion. He woke up with energy, his mind buzzing with excitement. Today, he told himself, would be the day history remembered him. He dressed in his finest suit, a custom-made piece that shimmered slightly under the light. As he adjusted his tie, he smiled at the reflection staring back at him. In his mind, he was already victorious. He imagined the headlines, "Billionaire CEO secures $7.5 billion deal." He imagined cameras flashing, his name trending, his reputation soaring higher than ever. Downstairs, the staff prepared the house as if for a festival. The floors were spotless, the flowers fresh, the conference table shining like glass. Plates of fruits and drinks were arranged carefully. Everyone moved quickly, their faces tense, for they knew how important this day was. The maid worked quietly, her daughter staying hidden in the kitchen. The memory of yesterday's outburst was still fresh, and both of them wanted to stay invisible. The CEO walked into the living room with confident steps. His assistant was already there, flipping through documents, his hands shaking slightly. "Everything ready?" the CEO asked in a sharp tone. The assistant nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Everything is prepared." The CEO smiled with satisfaction. He believed the deal was already his. But across town, the atmosphere was very different. The investors gathered in their office, their discussions serious and hushed. Papers lay on the table, contracts half complete. The man who had witnessed the scene with the maid's daughter sat quietly, but his silence spoke louder than anyone else in the room. The others respected him, trusted his judgment, and they could sense his hesitation. When he finally spoke, his words were calm but final. "I do not believe this is the man we should trust." The room went still. Billions were on the line, but his voice carried more weight than numbers. He explained briefly, not with anger, but with certainty, that he had seen something that revealed the CEO's true nature. He didn't go into detail, but his message was clear. Money alone was not enough. Leadership required respect, humility, and character. Without these, even the most brilliant plans could collapse. One by one, the other investors agreed. They knew that a leader's weakness of heart could destroy fortunes faster than bad numbers. It was decided. The deal would be withdrawn. Not slowly, not later, immediately. The decision was final, and the signatures that the CEO was waiting for would never come. Back at the mansion, the CEO prepared for the final call. He adjusted his chair, opened his laptop, and cleared his throat. His assistant handed him a glass of water, his hands still trembling. The screen lit up, and faces of the investors appeared. The CEO smiled broadly, ready to claim victory. But the faces on the other side were not smiling. Their eyes were cold, their voices formal. One of them spoke. "We have reviewed everything again, and after careful consideration, we have decided not to move forward with this deal." The CEO froze. He thought he had heard wrong. "Excuse me?" he said, forcing a polite smile. "This is a $7.5 billion agreement. You cannot just walk away now." His voice carried a mix of shock and disbelief. The investors remained calm. "We appreciate your time," another said, "but we believe this partnership is not the right fit. We wish you success in your future endeavors." The CEO's face turned pale. His smile disappeared. He leaned forward, trying to regain control. "Do you understand what you're giving up? Do you realize the profits you'll lose?" His voice grew sharper, desperate. But the investors were unmoved. They had already made their decision, and nothing he said could change it. The call ended, and the screen went dark. The room fell into heavy silence. The CEO sat frozen, staring at the black screen, his mind refusing to accept what had just happened. His assistant shifted uncomfortably, lowering his eyes, too afraid to speak. The staff in the house sensed the disaster, their movements slowing, the air thick with unease. Within hours, the news spread. Investors had pulled out of the $7.5 billion deal. Stock prices fell sharply, shareholders panicked, and rumors began to swirl. Reporters rushed to publish headlines: "CEO loses record-breaking deal. Confidence shaken in billionaire leader. $7.5 billion agreement collapses overnight." The dream that had carried the CEO for months had evaporated in a single moment. The CEO slammed his fists on the table, his voice echoing through the mansion. "This cannot be happening," he shouted. Rage burned in his eyes, but beneath the anger was fear. For the first time in years, he felt powerless. His empire, which had seemed unshakable, now trembled. Meanwhile, the investor who had made the decision sat quietly in his office. He did not celebrate, nor did he feel regret. He simply knew he had done the right thing. Trust, once broken, could not be repaired by numbers or contracts. He had seen the truth, and he had chosen to walk away. The maid heard the news later that day from other staff. She held her daughter close, whispering, "Sometimes the world punishes people who forget kindness." She did not fully understand business, but she understood life. She knew that no matter how rich or powerful someone became, arrogance could destroy them. The CEO, however, refused to see the truth. He blamed the investors, the market, his team, anyone but himself. He never thought for a moment that a single outburst, a cruel word to a child, had been the seed of his downfall. In his pride, he believed he was still untouchable. But deep inside, a fear began to grow, a fear he could not admit even to himself. That everything he had built could crumble, not because of numbers, but because of who he had become. The collapse of the deal was more than just a financial loss. It was the beginning of a storm that would shake his empire, his reputation, and his very identity. And the world, which once admired him, now watched with sharp eyes, waiting to see how far he would fall. The mansion that once felt like a palace now felt heavy with silence. The CEO walked through its wide hallways, but the shine of the chandeliers and the sparkle of the marble floors no longer gave him pride. Every step echoed with the memory of his failure. The deal he had dreamed of, the deal he had been certain would change his life forever, was gone. It had slipped from his hands like sand, leaving him with nothing but anger, confusion, and a bruised ego. He tried to tell himself it was just bad luck, that the investors had made a mistake, that the market had shifted. He called his advisors, demanding answers. He shouted at his managers, accusing them of not working hard enough. He even blamed the media, saying they had created pressure that scared the investors away. But deep inside, in a place he tried to avoid, he knew the truth. It had not been the numbers, nor the market, nor his team. It had been him. His own words, his own pride, his own arrogance had cost him everything. The world reacted quickly. News channels replayed clips of him smiling confidently only a day before, followed by headlines of the collapse deal. Journalists called it the fall of a giant. Competitors celebrated quietly, whispering that he had always been too proud. Shareholders panicked, pulling out their money, and the company's stock continued to fall. Employees who once admired him now whispered behind his back, wondering if their jobs were safe. His empire, which once felt unshakable, now stood on shaky ground. But the cruelest part was not the money or the headlines. The cruelest part was the loss of respect. Investors no longer trusted him. Partners no longer admired him. Even his staff, though still obedient, looked at him differently. He could sense it in their eyes. Fear mixed with disappointment. Loyalty mixed with quiet resentment. Respect, he realized too late, was more valuable than wealth. And respect could not be bought back once it was broken. The maid, who had served his house for years, continued her work silently. She did not gloat. She did not smile at his downfall. But inside, she knew there was justice in the world. Her daughter, once insulted and humiliated, now held her head a little higher. She was too young to understand the details of billion-dollar deals, but she understood something bigger, that cruelty had consequences, and that even the most powerful man could fall because of it. The CEO, meanwhile, sat alone in his study at night, staring at the city lights through tall glass windows. For years, those lights had looked like jewels to him, symbols of wealth and victory. Now they looked distant, cold, and unreachable. He poured himself a glass of expensive wine, but it tasted bitter. He scrolled through news articles on his tablet, but every word stabbed at his pride. He saw his own face on the covers of magazines, not as a hero but as a warning. Arrogance cost CEO $7.5 billion. A billionaire's fall. One outburst that destroyed an empire. He thought back to the moment, to the little girl sitting on the floor with her notebook. He remembered her frightened eyes, her trembling hands, her tears. He had dismissed it as nothing, just a child in the wrong place. But now he understood. That moment had not been small. It had been everything. It had revealed who he truly was, not to the child, not to the maid, but to the man who mattered most, the investor whose trust had been lost forever. For the first time in years, the CEO felt truly powerless. Money could not erase the memory. Influence could not buy back the deal. Power could not hide the truth. He had built his empire on discipline and hard work, but along the way he had forgotten humility, kindness, and respect. And without those, his empire was crumbling. Weeks passed, and the noise of the media faded. Other stories replaced his in the headlines, but the damage remained. His company was weaker, his reputation smaller. He was no longer seen as untouchable. People spoke of him as a lesson, a reminder of how quickly pride can destroy even the strongest. He still had wealth. He still had power. But he had lost something far greater, trust. And he knew, deep in his heart, that trust once broken could never fully return. The maid's daughter continued her studies. Sometimes, when she walked past the grand mansion with her mother, she remembered the day she had been shouted at. But she also remembered what followed. She understood something valuable at a young age, that kindness is not weakness, and arrogance is not strength. She promised herself she would never treat others the way the CEO had treated her. As for the CEO, he lived on, still rich, still famous, but forever carrying the scar of his mistake. People no longer looked at him with admiration. They looked at him with caution, with a silent warning in their eyes. He had become a story told in boardrooms and classrooms. The story of a man who lost billions not because of poor strategy, but because of poor character. And so the lesson was clear. Respect costs nothing, yet it is worth more than everything. A kind word can build bridges stronger than contracts, and a cruel word can destroy empires faster than any market crash. The CEO had learned this too late, but the world would remember. His name, once spoken with awe, was now spoken with a shake of the head, not as a symbol of success, but as a warning. No matter how high you climb, arrogance can pull you down in an instant.